Well, good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be, friends. We appreciate you joining us. I think most of our folks on this call are California sites, so we're very happy to have you with us today. This is Casey Gwynn, the president of Alliance for Hope International, and we are in our third webinar of a series that we have been doing on hope theory with Dr. Chan Hellman, our lead researcher at the University of Oklahoma at the Center for Applied Research on Nonprofit Organizations. And we're incredibly excited about this partnership. We're actually working now on going after some national research and evaluation money to support their team at University of Oklahoma as we build capacity around evaluation in family justice centers and our Camp Hope programs. It's just a really exciting time when you talk about hope. I just finished a set of recommendations to the Verizon Foundation that's going to involve additional funding of over $200,000 to a number of family justice centers across the country to be starting Camp Hope America based on the research that Chan has been doing with us for the last 3 years on our program in California. So we're just really excited about all the things that are going on. We're a couple of weeks away from our conference here, which is almost entirely sold out, both our hotel and our backup hotel. And I hope many of you will be joining us for the conference. This is the last webinar in a series, really as an introduction to what will be a whole day for our directors of family justice centers to come together on April 11th in San Diego in our pre-conference to really talk about evaluation and outcomes in family justice centers. So I want to thank Chan for joining us today. Some of you have met Chan. Most of you know our team at Alliance for Hope, and we're just incredibly excited to be able to share this webinar today. As most of you know, Blue Shield of California Foundation has invested an enormous amount of money in family justice centers in California over the last 5 years, and they are currently funding our Hope Project, which is focused on building evaluation in family justice centers in California, and particularly focusing on establishing and expanding our Voices committees. We have Voices members from many family justice centers in California coming to our conference in a few weeks, funded by Blue Shield. And we have a really exciting journey in this project to look at not only hope and how to measure trauma and how to measure a few other things, but we're also very interested in this whole notion of survivor-defined success, which we're going to be building into our Blue Shield initiative as we go. So if you haven't signed up, we're almost packed out for our Directors Leadership Summit on April 11th. But if you are still interested in coming, we can make room for you. That will be an amazing day to think about the future of measuring impacts in family justice centers across California and across the United States. So it's my great honor to turn it over to Dr. Chan Hellman now to talk about hope research and what's going on not only in his work, but really what's evolving nationally. This is one of the most exciting areas of research in the lives of trauma-exposed people that we have ever seen. And I have no doubt that it's going to move rapidly across the country in the months and years to come, and will be a significant key to funding for family justice centers that are able to measure outcomes more effectively when they're going after money from both government and non-government funders. So, Chan, thanks for joining us today. I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Casey. Thank you very much, and welcome, everybody. We have an opportunity for questions, I believe, at the end. However, if you type in questions, we can try to address those as we go along. So we'll go ahead and get started. What we're going to talk about today is really more some of the methodological considerations of integrating hope research. So the topics that we'll cover, as you can see, we'll revisit the idea of hope, maybe spend a little bit more time on the key components. We'll talk a little bit about the benefits of hope research. Certainly want to spend some time thinking about ethical issues, types of designs. I'll show you how we're going to measure hope, how it's measured both in the English language, and we have a Spanish language version. And then we'll kind of end off thinking about how do you collect data, how do you store data, and then from my perspective as a researcher, what are some components to communicating with your evaluator? So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So again, just to kind of briefly revisit, hope is a motivational theory that is grounded in the idea that an individual can develop pathways or mental strategies to obtain a goal that they desire, as well as the ability to direct and maintain mental energy towards those pursuits. And that aspect of it is what we refer to as agency. And again, so let's spend just a second on this concept of agency and what is mental energy. And it's certainly the attention, the awareness, motivation, grit, determination, perseverance, all of those things that require concentrated effort and thought to pursuing viable pathways towards goal attainment. So as you guys might remember, hope requires both pathways and agency. You can also think of pathways as way power and agency as willpower. And remember that high hope individuals do well. High hope individuals can identify multiple strategies towards goal attainment, especially in the presence of barriers. And we know from the research, both our own research as well as research conducted through other universities, that individuals who score high on hope tend to have higher physical, psychological, and social characteristics that allow them to thrive and flourish. So just kind of a model to think about what hope looks like. Both willpower or agency and way power, or again, pathways, is required for hope. Individuals can have a desirable goal and be very motivated to that, or have willpower, but if they don't have the pathways or the mental strategies, we would consider them to be low on hope. And in fact, that's the very definition of a wish as opposed to hope. So occasionally you may hear people say, make a comment, well, there's always hope, when in fact they may refer to the idea that it's a wish. Just another quick example. I'm in Oklahoma, and for me to say, I hope it doesn't rain today, well, I have no pathways for that. So what I really mean is that's a wish. I wish it wouldn't rain today. So again, just a few minutes spent to revisit the definition of hope and the two main components of pathways and agency. So thinking about the benefits of hope research, first of all, hope reflects a well-established psychological theory that is easy to understand and communicate. Again, it's about goals, pathways, and agency. There's a tremendous amount of empirical evidence supporting the benefits of instilling hope across the lifespan. What we also know is that hope is one of the top psychological strengths that tend to serve as a coping resource. And what I mean by that is the positive psychology movement has identified 24 character strengths or psychological strengths that we know can influence an individual's ability to flourish or thrive in their environment. And what empirically we know is that hope is one of the top strengths that allow people to flourish and thrive, especially in stressful situations. The other thing that our research with Casey and his team, but other research has demonstrated that we can move the needle on hope. Hope can be improved with intentional, targeted activities that provide individuals with pathways to their goal attainment. Another benefit of hope research is because the language is relatively simple and it is an established theoretical framework. My push in the work that I do falls under this theme of providing a common language for collective impact. And what I mean by that is collectively, the Family Justice Centers can begin to use the language of hope, and not from a very abstract idea that's not measurable. We know that hope is about providing individuals with pathways or strategies to a better future. And so that common language can allow for a higher level of social advocacy. Again, last time we talked about the idea that the program services that Family Justice Centers support are pathways to hope for the clients and families that you serve. And as I mentioned, this issue of social advocacy can be used at a local level, at an individual level, but also at a larger community and system level. And if we think about system level change for survivors of domestic violence and trauma, having a unified theory such as hope can help us all work very intentionally towards collective impact. So we'll move into the methodology aspects, and these are just considerations throughout the rest of this presentation as we begin to think about implementing hope as an evaluation system. So these are just kind of some conversations about things to begin to think about. The first is just some ethical considerations. If you work with any university in terms of an evaluation, or if you work with us, for instance, here at the University of Oklahoma, everything that we do is going to go through a human subject review board to ensure ethical treatment of participants in the study. And so first of all, it goes without saying that research should be conducted in a way that protects and dignifies the survivor. And so oftentimes we may get a comment about, do we collect data as soon as an individual walks in the door? And you know, again, as long as that is in the best interest of the survivor, then the answer is yes. So we need to remember that participation in the evaluation, while important and necessary on many different levels, is also voluntary. And when I mean voluntary, an individual they need to be able to have the opportunity to decide not to participate in data collection without the fear of services being withheld. Also, an individual needs to be able to decide throughout the process of data collection that they can stop at any point without fear of any type of reprisal. And while we may understand that, we need to be very intentional in working with participants that they understand that. The next piece is to think about whether the data collection is going to be confidential or anonymous. And what I mean by confidential is that there is usually a way to link the data to a survivor, either by name or client ID. And if that's the case, then we need to inform the participant on how their information is going to be protected. Anonymous responses means that while collect the data from an individual, perhaps face-to-face, that when I received the data as the researcher, I could not determine who did or did not participate in the research. That is, responses cannot be linked to any individual. Also, when we think about collecting data, and your agencies have consent processes employed, as we begin to move towards research, we also have to think about how survivors are informed with respect to the HOPE data that we collect. So certainly sharing with them the purpose of the research, not only for the risks and benefits associated with them, their own benefits of learning about hope and hope theory, but also in terms of the benefits to the greater community and to the greater society about how hope research can lead towards social advocacy on behalf of survivors nationwide or worldwide. Again, the idea that people need to have the opportunity and knowledge of opting out of participating in the study at any stage. So just a few ethical considerations. There are certainly more if you work with a university that your researchers will adhere to. But these are probably the top ones to start thinking about within your own centers. So if we think about the science of hope, as we're going to move forward from a methodological perspective, the first thing to highlight is what is the purpose? Why are we engaging in that? And the purpose of this research, and I'm using research very specifically as opposed to evaluation. And the purpose of this research is to assess the change in hope among survivors seeking services through family justice centers. And again, the reason I'm using the word research is because research suggests that information can be generalizable to the greater population of survivors, not just the survivors that are walking through your front doors. If the application of this was only to your center, this would be an evaluation. So I think we ought to be very intentional that we're collectively engaging in applied research activities. I also want to highlight the idea that we're talking about hope as an outcome, and outcomes are different than outputs, as you know. An outcome is the impact that you hope to have on the clients that you serve, whereas an output would reflects how many survivors you saw or served in a month. The importance of an outcome in this particular case, with specific attention to hope, is that hope represents the theory of change of the impact that your organization has on survivors. That is, how is hope impacted? What are the pathways that survivors learn and obtain in their own goal attainment strategies? How does your program impact the capacity of individuals to focus mental energy on their own goals as opposed to, let's say, focusing that energy on how to stay safe in the moment? The types of designs that this type of research would be interested in are very traditional. So true experimental designs that have randomized assignment to treatment and control groups are the only ways that we can test cause and effect relationships, and also not necessarily appropriate to these types of settings. We, for ethical or practical purposes, we don't necessarily want to think about randomly assigning people to any type of treatment. So the experimental design is discussed only because it's the gold standard from an academic and research standpoint. And another type of experimental design is a pre-test, post-test design, or quasi-experimental design, to use some of that language, which is the one that we're going to recommend, and we'll talk about more in just a few minutes. Another approach is what's considered to be the post-test only design, and often used in nonprofit organizations that I work with. That is, at the end of services, as the client or survivor is transitioning out of the programs, we tend to give them surveys about how they perceived the programs. Again, it's post-test only designs, and while valuable, it's not, from an academic and methodological standpoint, it's not as strong. Again, we're going to recommend a pre-test, post-test design because it actually will allow us to begin to assess the opportunities for change. And you can see on the slide some additional resources from the Social Research Methods website. again, as I mentioned, the randomized control group experimental design is not appropriate in this particular project or set of projects. And what we're going to advocate for is a pre-test, post-test design. Now, in the pre-test, post-test design, it's important to know that an individual pre-test set of data like HOPE, so scores on HOPE as a client or survivor walks into the program, that data must be linked to their post-test data. And I suspect that Casey may have some comments at the end of this about his experience with matching that data, but also I cannot highlight enough the importance of designing a system where those sets of data can be linked. And in order to do that, we're going to have to identify a common identifier at the Family Justice Center level, whether you have your own case IDs that you create, but we need to identify a common identifier for the data that, again, protects the survivor, the person participating in the data. And in my case, researchers will ultimately need to have data that is not linked to an individual's name. That is, as a researcher, I should never know who specifically filled out my pre-test and post-test data. Yet I need a common identifier to link that information. So it's a problem, it's a solvable problem, but it's one that deserves significant consideration. So thinking about the HOPE survey and collecting it at pre-test, it's preferable that that is done at the intake process. However, if an individual is in crisis, that may not be possible. So we have to be a little bit flexible, but as early as possible for them walking in the door. What we do not want is for some change to have already occurred that we did not capture. But post-test surveys, HOPE surveys, should be collected toward the end of services. Again, you might have people receiving different levels of service or attending more or less sessions. And so this becomes, again, a difficult yet solvable problem. The other thing that I was reflecting on, especially from our last conversation, is the attention paid to survivor-defined success. And what I would be advocating here is that collecting your survivor-defined goals in such a way that those goals could be linked to the HOPE data. And it allows us to answer this question, that is, do changes in HOPE predict the attainment of survivor-defined goals? And while every survivor may have a unique goal to them, what we could easily assess is goal attainment or progress towards goal attainment, regardless of the goal. And so the question is what I would hypothesize is that as you improve HOPE, that is, as you give people pathways towards goal attainment, they're going to be more likely to have access to achieving their goals.
Jan, this is Casey. Can you just go back for a second? I think that's really interesting, and that's a very significant piece in the work we're doing with the Full Frame Initiative nationally and with Blue Shield in California. So, in the journey of having survivors really define their goals, probably in the intake process, maybe at a clinical assessment point at some point early on in the process where they've come to a family justice center for services, each survivor really identifying what their individual goals are obviously may look different for each survivor. I mean, they may look totally different for that matter. So the notion would be that our goal would be to capture what each survivor says their goals are for coming to the Family Justice Center, or what they want in their life. And then, because of the fact that we've got a case ID or the ability to identify, we could then contrast each individual survivor's goals with their HOPE scores.
That is correct. That's what would be again from an academic and research perspective. It is the ultimate goal of this HOPE research is that HOPE is a significant predictor of individuals having the capacity to achieve their desirable outcomes, and we should not necessarily have survivors fit their goals into a cluster of common goals, though that may be the case. But really their own, as you indicated, their own individual and unique goals. And if we could actually access, maybe from let's say a case manager or clinician's perspective, an assessment of goal attainment, that is the person's making positive progress or has attained the goal, then we can actually statistically assess the relationship that changes in HOPE had with that.
That's great.
Chan, I also have a quick question or point for clarification. So we talked about pre-test and post-test. As you know, some survivors only come to the Family Justice Center once. And this is really a paradigm shift from us, from the Alliance, on trying to create that long-term relationship and environment where they would return for months and months and months in order to really be able to kind of track the changes over a span of 3 to 6 months to a year, as opposed to just one visit. So in terms of being able to kind of roll this process out, is the initial goal that a HOPE survey would be collected after each visit as opposed to a specific time frame?
I think that that will almost have to be at the program or service level, a decision made at that level. So if an individual is coming again for one or a few visits, that ought to have the same level of assessment as somebody who's coming for an extended period of time. That is a pre-test, post-test. We know that it's not going to be 100% attainable, that is to capture data from every single individual, and have a slide a little bit later that talks about the idea that we're going to have a set of pre-test data, we're going to have a set of post-test data, and then we're going to have a smaller set of matched pre-test, post-test data. And what I would tell you is that all of that information is going to be valuable in some fashion. But again, it's the reason why we're not doing a true randomized experiment, is because we can't control for the needs of the survivor.
Mm-hmm.
That's
great.
Okay. So thinking about collecting the data, that is, how do we get the information, HOPE scores collected? And so the idea is that in some cases, the individual will have the capacity to fill out the survey themselves, if it's a pencil or and paper type traditional survey, or if it's a link to a web-based survey, or if it's part of the intake process, that is, they can respond to it. Other times it may require an interview. The person, just needs to have that human contact and conversation, or they may have some difficulty in concentrating, whatever the reason is. Data will be collected using both methods. Again, one of the reasons why we're not using the randomized experimental design is because we can't control for the needs of the survivors. And so we need to be okay with the idea that some people will be able to fill this out themselves, and others may require us to do it in an interview style. We also have, with the HOPE research, the HOPE scale has been translated to many different languages and validated in that regard. And we have access to those different versions. I'll show you in just a few minutes both the English and Spanish version. But again, these versions have been psychometrically validated. And so we're very comfortable with their use. The other thing that I want to point out is the importance of a completed HOPE survey. So the HOPE survey itself is based upon 8 items that measure both pathways and agency. And if an individual only fills out a few of those items, or they fill out, let's say, 6 of the 8 items, well, cases with missing data, that is not not a complete response on all 8 items, are electronically eliminated from the statistical analysis. Now, we want all of the data. I mean, even if there's missing cases, we will want everything that's collected. Just know that if we collect data and 50% of the participants do not have complete data, then our analysis will only be on those individuals who have provided complete information. It's a common issue in applied research, but we need to strive for completed survey as much as possible. And again, the only way we can assess statistically validity and reliability estimates is on completed surveys. And those are both statistical issues that I can easily assess, or if you have a research partner, they can easily assess as well. So here is the adult hope scale. Earlier I mentioned that it's an 8-item survey, but here you see the 12 items. The survey itself has 12 items. Only 8 items are used to measure both pathway and agency. And so at the end of each statement is either a P for pathways, an A for agencies, or an F for filler items. And so I want to make a quick comment about the filler items, which are not used in creating the HOPE scale, though they are important items to include. So the idea with the filler items is that when individuals are filling out a survey, and for instance, when you've filled out a survey, once you start to recognize that all of these items have some similarity to them, it's human nature to stop reading and attending to the entire statement. That is, we will start looking for clues as to what the item's about and just respond that way. Filler items actually force the individual responding to pause for a moment because the items are qualitatively different. And it helps ensure the validity of attended responses. So that's why it's a 12-item measure. So here, and I also provided the reference at the bottom. If you were to search on Google or Google Scholar for the Snyder, Harris, Anderson, Holloran et al. Article, you could locate that on Google. You could also do a Google search on adult hope scale. This scale is widely available for use. So that's just the scientific citation for the instrument. So I also included from Galeano's recent publication where they validated the Spanish version, Spanish language version of the instrument. And I just typed those in as they are presented. But again, we have access to multiple language items as needed. So as we begin to think about collecting HOPE survey, again, one of the things that each Family Justice Center is going to have to work through with their researcher is to decide on an ID, a way to identify pre-test and post-test measures so that they can be matched. Again, the only way to assess change is to compare pre-test scores to post-test scores. I do want to highlight that we want to protect the survivors' information here. You know, I would not want to, as a researcher, would not want to receive a survey that has Chan Hillman listed as the person filling out the survey. That is the ID. Your researcher just doesn't need to have that information. The other thing that each Family Justice Center is going to have to think about as they design the protocol in terms of collecting data is when are you going to collect? Are you going to collect it during the intake process, which is preferred, and as close to the end of services, which is also preferred? However, As Natalia indicated earlier, you have different clients coming in for different services, and the research team just needs to make a decision as to who's going to be included in the data collection, and perhaps more importantly, who are the groups of individuals that we may have to exclude just because they don't fit the data collection requirements. I do want to say that collecting data from as many individuals who receive services through your agency is important so that we get a good representation. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a few minutes. Again, as I mentioned, I just can't highlight, I've just infused this all the way through the slides, the importance of a matched pre-test and post-test. Again, you know, I think Casey can maybe make some comments, if you would, on this point, your experiences of matching a pre-test, post-test, the difficulty of that, but also why it is so important. So I don't know, Casey, if you have anything you want to add there.
Sure. Well, I think you've probably figured it out by now, but it is incredibly difficult to do this, and it takes an enormous amount of diligence. In the early years of our Camp Hope research, we're in our third year of studying Camp Hope America with the University of Oklahoma and Chan's team. And in the first year, our match rate was quite low. It was acceptable, I guess, from a scientific standpoint, but it was incredibly low. This last year, we had a number of other family justice centers who started a Camp Hope program, and they tried to administer the Children's Hope Scale pre-post camp and 30 days post camp. So there were three basically points in time we were administering it, and their rates were unbelievably low because they didn't realize the incredible complexity of it and the significance of being able to plan for that and know how you're going to make sure that you match up that pre with that post. And a lot of our sites in Camp Hope America this last year didn't, you know, they kind of sent them all to us and said, well, you know, we did the best we could. And, you know, here's the pre, but we don't have the post, or here's the pre and the post, but we don't have the 30-day post, but thanks so much. You know, here you go. Those were not of any use to us when we didn't have the pre and the post matched. So we are working really hard right now in our Camp Hope project to put this all into an online system for our national Camp Hope research with the University of Oklahoma. And we are hoping to try to do the same to come up with an online a way to do this so that it doesn't have to be done necessarily manually. So stay tuned on that. Chan has a very robust system called Qualtrics that a lot of researchers use across the country. But just as an emphasis, even if you start this with paper surveys, you need to give an enormous amount of thought to how you're going to marry up the pre and the post, because when he says if you don't have it, it gets thrown out. There's kind of no point in doing it if you don't invest the time and the energy to ensure that you're going to have a high match rate.
Well, thank you, Casey. And I'll also just kind of end with this idea that, you know, the stronger data that you have with this process, the power of hope becomes amazing in being able to tell the story, both with the community at large, information sharing, but also with funders. So I just can't emphasize enough the importance of thinking through this collecting of hope data. This is something that we've kind of alluded to and hit on in different ways, but you know, at the end of the day, at the end of our data collection processes, we're actually going to be sampling survivors to participate in the Hope research from your family justice centers. That is, we're not going to be able to collect data from 100% of people who walk in and out of your doors from this point forward. Sometimes people are just in crisis and you can't collect the data. As Natalia inquired earlier, you know, short-term services, you know, if they walk in and they're going to be here for an hour or 2 hours, do we collect data from them? As a researcher, I'll tell you that more data is good, but you know, you at the individual sites have to make a determination. And so at the end of the day, the data that we collect, the data that we analyze reflects a sample of survivors receiving services at the Family Justice Center. We also want to recognize the balance between burden of collecting data and yet still getting meaningful data. As Casey indicated, the pre-test, post-test connection can be and feel like a bit of a burden, but you know, I promise you that Casey could also spend a considerable amount of time talking about how meaningful that data has been in helping advocacy efforts. So again, we'll at the end of the day, we will be talking about a sample. The importance of thinking about sampling is that we need to make sure that we collect data in such a fashion that it's a representative sample of the clients that you serve. That is, we don't want only a specific small proportion of the type of individuals that you serve just because the data collection is easier there. You know, at the end of the day, we want to be able to say that this is the level of change and hope that your Family Justice Center has on survivors. That's the goal. Also, we have to think about how many people participate, how many survivors do we need to collect data on. We could certainly identify from statistical formulas, if you have 5,000 people in your target population, what is the sample size needed? I'll just tell you that more is better. The larger the sample size, the more confidence your researcher is going to have in the data, but also people in the general community, people listening to your story. If you serve 5,000 people a month and you've collected data from 50, they're going to have a hard time thinking about how to generalize results from those 50 individuals to your entire Family Justice Center. So again, the larger sample size is going to be better. Well, after you begin to collect the data, let's assume that we've made it to that level. But once we started to collect it, we need to also think about how we're going to store the data. Again, let me just point out the importance of a match when you think about storing the data. So, for instance, if you plan to do this electronically, that is, you know, you may have a database system or platform that allows you to collect this data. But let's say that you use something like Excel. And you know, what we're going to want to do is for you to have an Excel spreadsheet for your pretest scores, and then an entirely different spreadsheet for your post-test scores. Now, your researcher, if it's me, for instance, has the capacity to merge those two data sheets based upon the common identifier. That is, that it will match itself automatically through the computer. So, you know, you need to think about somebody who's going to have a responsibility to enter in all of the intake or pretest surveys, and somebody who will have the responsibility to enter in all of this data at the post-test. And you know, one strategy might be to set a time each week for data entry and task a specific individual that is their job on Fridays at 3 p.m. or whatever is appropriate for your agency, that's when HOPE data will be entered. If you, excuse me, if you collect the survey via paper and pencil, then you need to think about where are you going to store the data. Again, maximizing confidentiality, being sure to protect information about your clients. It's not uncommon, for instance, for us in our studies to have just a regular box that when people get finished filling out these surveys, we just put surveys in the box. Now that does require an individual to have to go through those and do data entry and that, or somehow get them collected and then sent to the research team. But again, both strategies, whether electronic or pencil and paper type, what we want to maximize is the number of pre-test and post-test collected surveys that we get that we have the potential for a match. We also want to minimize the potential for loss. So, we don't want somebody accidentally misplacing where the box of surveys are, or somebody accidentally throwing them out. So the data have to be protected and very intentional. So coming to the end of this part of the conversation, and a couple more slides, but coming to the end, these are just my own thoughts in terms of communicating with the researcher, my experience working with human service organizations. The first thing is that a lot of people will contact me and apologize because they think I'm really busy, and I would respond that we're all busy. But this is very important information, and if I'm the researcher, my response is, if you have a question, call. Don't wait. It doesn't matter to me how simple it is or how complex it is. I would rather make sure that we're on the same page with data collection. I also suggest that you establish a pretty consistent time to just check in. And this would be any individual or group of individuals who are associated. So maybe it's an individual who's doing the data entry. Maybe it's who's doing the data collection, that whole team, just to meet with the researcher on phone, video, or otherwise. How's the process going? Can it be improved? It's a good time to ask questions like, people tend not to understand this word. Can we change that word? My first reaction would be to say no on your data collection, but it's worth having the conversation. Right? It's also common that on the front end of the project there will be more conversations that take place, but as the process and the protocol settles into a nice trend, communication will just kind of become less and less frequent. The other thing that you want to talk about with your researcher is how to get the data to them and how often. How often would you want to send that data to the researcher to build the database for statistical analysis? From my standpoint, I actually like to collect the data fairly often, just because it's safer once we get it into the statistical database, but also because I can communicate with the executive director, or the executive director or leadership team can communicate with me and say, hey, we're meeting with this group of funders. Do you have any preliminary results? And that's pretty easy to do from the researcher's perspective if they have access to the data. I think you should also think about the deliverables from the researcher, maybe specify when you should expect to get a summary report of the data. It's a good time to have a conversation about, what all projects everybody's working on, but also just setting the priorities of when you can expect to begin to see some results. The final thing I would say in terms of communicating is that everything is a learning process, and one of the things that we'll learn during the research process is the best way to collect data at your site. Every site is going to be unique and have things that work better, and we need to be flexible enough to meet the needs of not only your survivors but your agency as well. Communicating with the researcher, if you're worried and you have a question but you're worried about interrupting the researcher, from my perspective, don't. Pick up the phone or shoot an email. From that standpoint, I decided to go ahead, and this might be a good time to put my contact information and certainly go through Natalia or the Alliance, but if you have any questions or just want any further conversation, I'm available. I'd be happy to talk with you. So that's again my direct line, but also the college's assistant who during most of the day knows exactly where I'm at and how to get a hold of me. So I would encourage you to reach out if you have any questions. And for me, that's the end of this brief overview of HOPE methodology.
That's great, Chan. Thank you very much. We have a number of people on the call. If you have any questions you'd like to type in, feel free to do that. We've got quite a few folks on the call, so I'm not probably going to unmute everybody. But if you would like to type in any questions, we do have a couple questions that have already come up, Chan. One is this whole question about how to document survivor-defined goals. So obviously, that seems like it's going to be somewhat of an open-ended question that might be asked, in the intake process or at an initial screening process. Do you personally have some goals that you would like to achieve by coming to the Family Justice Center? So I guess that's a kind of a question I have. I know we're going to talk a little bit about this at the conference, but would love to have kind of your thoughts about how we're going to do this notion of survivor defined goals, because it seems like capturing those at the beginning and then being able to ask, do you feel like you've achieved the goals that you set for yourself? And maybe that's even these are the goals that you set originally. How do you, I mean, probably asking them about each of them, wouldn't you say, on the post-test side of it?
Certainly, and one of the things that we'll talk about at the summit in that process is I've developed a HOPE worksheet that might be useful for that regards, where individuals specifically articulate their goals and begin to develop pathways. And then there's some exercises to work on agency, but we could use or modify that document as a systematic approach and make that available to the centers. I tend to think of those as, when people are developing treatment outcomes and they're perhaps staffing those cases. So I agree with you. It would be nice from the research standpoint to have a systematic way in which we're collecting and asking that information. So maybe during the leadership summit, we can bring out the HOPE worksheet and then make whatever modifications through the input of the participants.
Yeah.
That would be most useful to them.
Yeah, that's great. We've got a number of questions about kind of the role of the Alliance and University of Oklahoma in kind of supporting this effort. We have presented this webinar really in a very general way. We've recorded it. It'll be available on our website, both at FamilyJusticeCenter.com and at Alliance for Hope International. You can access this information. Our view of this from the Alliance's perspective is we are being funded by Blue Shield of California to support California sites. And Chan has expressed his interest in having the University of Oklahoma be part of the California evaluation, California research project, I should say, on family justice centers. So the goal will be to come up with both a national template and maybe perhaps even a California template for the purposes of the Blue Shield research, so that you do have something that we hope will ultimately be consistent between centers in California. So essentially, we're researching the same things. And so we will be looking forward at the summit to talking about this notion that Chan just raised of a template worksheet of some kind for survivor-defined goals that will clearly vary by survivor, and that will make the pre-post all that much more important, to be documenting what a survivor says his or her goals are when they come into the center, and how they view their achievement of those goals or their progress toward those goals at the kind of conclusion of their perhaps service journey or the time that they're spending with a particular family justice center. So our goal is to be able to get all of that into databases that we can then analyze center by center and statewide in California. That's one of the things that Blue Shield wants us to be doing. So we will continue to be talking about this on April 11th. We'll be talking about some of these other areas that Chan mentioned wanting to talk about around resiliency and kind of these issues of agency around zeal and grit and some of the things we've been measuring in Camp Hope. We certainly want to do that as well. When you ultimately kind of see this coming together, Chan, what do you think, and this is a number of questions we've had too, what do you think the time frame is that it'll take to fill this out? for a survivor. I mean, obviously, time is very significant for navigators and case managers and people doing intake and people trying to screen clients at an exit stage or kind of get feedback. Do you think this is a 5 to 10 minute process, or what do you think this will end up looking like from a timing standpoint?
Sure. I think we should focus on something that is about a 10-minute or less process, at least initially, and then certainly to add or make adjustments we can. But again, the idea is to get meaningful data, but to minimize that burden.
I do want to say centers will have to make this choice about how often they administer the adult hope scale, whether it's per visit or over a period of time at different intervals. I do want to say that we had some concern in the Camp Hope research about kind of survey fatigue. We have seen some of that's gone on in our Camp Hope research with the University of Oklahoma. The other thing that's very hard to capture that we've also seen, however, is the educating of clients about hope and their realization that these questions actually matter to them, and they start understanding why we're administering this. And one of the things we've seen with the kids is they have these aha moments where they realize, hey, I'm answering this question differently than I answered it a week ago. I remember this, and I remember that I said, no, I'm really bad at that, or no, I don't, I give up easily, and now I'm answering it. Like there's this fascinating kind of education process that goes on in measuring hope. And I think we're going to find the same thing with measuring survivor-defined success and measuring their goals and helping them articulate and think about their goals, much like a very aggressive case manager would do in really helping them articulate their pathways to achieve the goals that they're setting for themselves. So I think there is a potential for survey fatigue, which a number of you have asked about. I also think that there's a benefit in the education that happens for adults and children when they're starting to think about what hope means to them and why it is that it's so important for us to be able to measure that in their lives. I don't know if you have any other comments about that, Chan, but those have led to very meaningful conversations with our kids at camp.
No, I think that's excellent, and certainly what I was thinking about why the importance of the match and just the power of hope. Once it becomes integrated into your system. So I think that's an excellent example.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Chan, thank you for the presentation. Natalia, thank you for organizing this. Michael Burke is out sick today, so he was not able to join us. But we're very appreciative of our partnership with the University of Oklahoma. I will tell you that I have little doubt that the Verizon Foundation is going to be investing millions of dollars in Camp Hope America in the coming years because of the research that the University of Oklahoma has done with us on Camp Hope. We, for the first time, are pursuing published research on the impact of camping on trauma-exposed children, and that research has stunning results. And if we can begin to measure the impact of family justice centers in that way, I have little doubt that we're going to see increased funding and increased support for collective impact models like family justice centers because of Chan's leadership and support for us in this movement as it goes forward in the years to come. So thank you all for joining us. Chan, thanks for being with us. We look forward to having you with us in San Diego in a couple of weeks.